discussion we had last couple of days. I hope to complete this aspect of the discussion today. We looked at various arguments presented by theistic traditions in order to prove the existence of God. In our last week discussion, we looked at cosmological argument. That means basically from the nature of the universe. In that, we looked at two main ideas. One is the uncaused cause, or the first cause. God as the first cause in the universe. Now that idea comes from the idea of causality. Causality, the cause and effect. Everything in the universe has causes. Now, if you try to identify the cause of everything, ultimately you go backward and backward and backward. There is no end. So, philosophers like Aristotle argued that there must be some point which is caused by itself, not caused by anything else. Now, if that also has been caused by something else, then again the process starts going back. So, Aristotle's argument was uncaused cause, or the first cause. And Christian religion, religious tradition borrowed this Aristotelian argument, and then they said, yes, there is a first cause. That first cause is none other than God. So, the God as the first cause. And then the similar argument for the mover, unmoved mover. Everything in the universe, including planets, everything is moving. So now if something is moving, idea is that it cannot have itself moved. So something else should have pushed it, moved it. Now if you look for, like you look for the cause, the moving factor, A was moved by B, B was moved by C, and so on. Ultimately, it also ends in infinite regress. Rather than Aristotle argued that there must be an unmoved mover, or the first mover of objects. Now, this argument was also borrowed by Christian theology, and then that argument was presented incorporating God into that system. So they said, yes, there must be an unmoved mover. That unmoved mover is God. Okay. So, and also the third aspect of that argument was God as infinite being. And so that was the cosmological argument. And then we had teleological argument. Teleological argument is from the design. Now, that argument is based on the idea that the universe has a design. It is designed, it has a purpose. It has been designed by God in order to achieve some particular purpose. So the ideas of purpose and also design are very important. Like if you take any particular object, if you take a clock, so clock has been designed by somebody in order to have some kind of purpose. So in the same manner, they argued that the universe is so orderly, so it has a design. That design was done by God, and then there is a purpose. Universe is moving to achieve some purpose. So so based on that, they argued that God exists. This idea of purpose or the meaning is something very interesting. According to this view, the universe has a meaning, purpose. Universe is functioning, existing, till it achieves that meaning. So once that purpose is over, then everything will be over. So this concept of universe is beginnings from some particular point, fixed point, and then moving towards the end. Okay, that is the idea of the universe. Now, from Buddhist perspective, we know that the idea of universe is different. It is not being created by anybody, so it doesn't have any particular purpose. That is how we think. Somehow others, this is the argument, teleological argument, that universe has a purpose and it has been designed. So the purpose is God only knows, and we don't know it. All of us have been created by God according to this view, although we don't know, but God sees a purpose in us. So all our life have a certain purpose. We are serving some purpose, some final end. So these are the ideas we discussed last week. We will move into little bit different three arguments, and then we will conclude this discussion. Another argument is what is called moral argument. Now, in the previous class, we were discussing ethics. Ethics means basically morality. So this is based on, this argument is presented in two ways. One is to hold that the moral principles are universal, and such universal moral standards, commands, originate from a divine source, which is God. The 10 Commandments in Christianity are an example. Now, the moral argument presented in two ways. One way is to say that morality is universal, and the universal morality must have been given by a universal being. Now, in other words, what it means is this: morality is basically concerned with good and bad, right and wrong. Right? Now, according to this view, good and bad, right and wrong are universal. That means if something is good, it is good in everywhere, all the time. If something is bad, it is bad in everywhere, all the time. So that is what is meant by universal. No time, space distinction, anytime, anywhere, the morality is valid. Now that is a universal morality. So moral principles are universal, means that, they are applicable everywhere. So universal moral standards originate from a divine being, divine source, which is God. The idea is that these universal moral principles are given by equally universal person. Now God, they define as omniscient, all-knowing, omnipresent, present in everywhere, and also omnipotent, all good. Now God is an all good person. So omniscient, all good person is the one. So according to that definition, they say that the universal morality comes from God. So this idea is something in ethics, ethical studies, something very interesting. Even without believing in God, you can say that certain moral principles are universal. For example, in the morning we discussed 5 precepts and the morality. Now certain principles, certain moral principles like not killing, not harming, not stealing what belongs to others. Now we can say that these are universal principles. There can be some exceptions. There can be some occasions where you cannot, you will have to kill some people, kill some animals or whatever. But those are exceptions. But as a general rule, you can say that killing is bad universally. Harming is bad universally. Stealing is bad universally, right? Now, when Buddhism says those are universally bad, universally applicable, Buddhism doesn't refer to concept of God. Now, how does Buddhism say that killing is bad, universally bad? Now, according to Buddhism, the principle is any living being doesn't like harm. All living beings like their life. Now, if all living beings love their life, killing, that life is not good. So, Buddhism gives, the universal principle, but of course the Buddhist basis is not God. It is based on human nature. Human nature is that we all like our life. Not only human nature, animal nature is also like that. Any small living being tries to preserve its life. Even mosquitoes like their life. That's why when you do this, they just go. Okay. So we can say all living beings love their life. Now that is human nature of the beings. Human nature and the nature of the being. So based on that, according to Buddhism, we can say killing is bad. Now according to this view, this particular view, killing is bad. I mean, I'm just giving an example, not because of that, but because God had said that it is bad. So the basis is God. So according to this view, the universally applicable morality can be given by God, or it has been given by God. Now, if you take example from Christianity, Christianity has the 10 commandments. 10 commandments in Christian religion, according to the Old Testament, was given by God to Moses. Moses is one of the early prophets in the Judaic philosophy. So the 10 commandments were given by, now these are commandments. Now, so that they were given by God. So because they were given by God, nobody can disobey them. Okay, that is idea. So the moral argument, one moral argument is that universal moral principles have been given by God. So therefore, those things have to be obeyed. In ethics, this comes as a divine command theory. Now, when we study ethics, in the ethics we have this idea, divine command theory. In ethics also, this question is discussed. Where do the moral principles come? How do the moral principles get the validity? Why should we obey moral principles? Now, theistic religion will say, because it comes from God, so you must obey. Because if you don't obey, God will punish you. That's the idea. Now, again, if you look at Buddhism, which is not a theistic religion, moral principles we have to obey, but not because God punishes you. Okay? So there are different reasons for that. According to Buddhism, when we are living immorally, our own conscience blame us. Attanava attanang upavadati. Attanava attanang upavadati. So your own conscience blame you. That's the thing. Not because of God. And also there can be other things. If I kill somebody, actually I am really working against this universal nature of all living beings. All living beings want to preserve their life. So, like that, from a Buddhist point of view, we can look for different types of moral reasoning. But this divine command theory says that we have to obey commands of God. So the morality comes from God, so it is coming from God, so we have to obey. Now, that is one form of moral argument. So to summarize, first you conclude that moral principles are universal. Morals are universally applicable. So universally applicable morality comes from equally universal being. Now that is one argument. The other form of the argument, this argument comes from the fact that ordinary people are not perfect in their morality, being moral. They possess different degrees of morality. The different degrees of morality have to assume that there is a perfect degree of morality. God has the perfect degree of morality. Now, this is somewhat different argument. If you, according to this argument, if you look at different people's moral standards are different. Nobody is perfect. Okay, some people are more moral, some others are less moral. Nobody is perfect. Now, if nobody is perfect, according to this argument, it argues that there must be some perfect moral person. All the other people are not perfect, so there must be a perfect person. That perfect moral person is God. Now you remember earlier we discussed, for example, all the living beings are finite, limited. Now if all the living beings are finite or limited, there must be somebody who is infinite, unlimited. So that infinite being is God. So that was argument we saw earlier. Now this argument is very similar, okay? This argument is very similar because all people are not perfect in their morality. So if all people are not perfect in morality, there must be a perfectly moral person. So that perfectly moral person is God. So these are the two ways of presenting the moral argument, okay? So one is moral principles are universal. The second is that because ordinary people are imperfect in their morality, there must be a perfect person. So in both cases, this perfectly moral person is God. So based on that, you conclude that there is God, God exists, okay? So this is the argument from morality, moral argument. What do you think about it? Now, I try to show you, we can say moral principles are universal. We can argue moral principles are universal, but without assuming that there is a God. There can be other reasons. Okay? Moral principles are universal. There can be other reasons. Now, in that context, you have to think that moral behavior usually applicable to human beings only. Animals, we don't expect to be immoral. Okay? Now, sometimes, we attribute certain qualities to animals also, but basically, we don't expect animals to be behaving morally or immorally. They just behave the way they are, but human behavior towards other human is moral or immoral. Humans' behavior towards other beings like animals can be moral or immoral. So morality basically is applicable to human behavior. We don't talk about the morality of the other beings. If your dog bites you, I mean, we don't attribute any moral reasoning to the dog. Sometimes your own pet dog can bite you. If it goes mad, it will bite you. No guarantee. So like that. So the human beings, we attribute moral behavior. Now, so that means that we can have moral behavior, morality based on the human nature. This Attupanayika Pariyaya, comparing it yourself, that is also universal. But here you have the universal moral principle based on the universal concept of God. Okay. And then the other one is the perfect and imperfect. Because everybody is imperfect in their morality, there must be a perfectly moral being. So this is the second form of argument. You need to think about, because now whether we really need that kind of universal moral being in order to have a perfect morality. And also you can think, what do we mean by perfect morality? Now in Buddhism we talk about being an arahant or Samma Sambuddha. But basically we talk about being an arahant is the person without raga dosa moha. Person without raga dosa moha is an arahant. Now what we say by that is an arahant doesn't have any akusala. Arahant has kusala. But then we do not use this concept of perfect. Okay? In Buddhism we say araha. Now when we look at from the point of view of araha, all the arahants are devoid of any akusala. Buddha is also araha. So Bhagava arahant. Buddha is also arahant. So arahant doesn't have any akusala. But we do not use this language of perfect. So we don't say arahant is a perfect person. Actually arahant can have, although arahant doesn't have lobha dosa moha, arahant can have, I told you the other day, arahant jumping over a ditch. Sometimes that type of thing can happen. During the time of the Buddha, there was an arahant who always used the very rough language. So those things can happen. But that doesn't mean that he is not an arahant. Okay? So when we describe arahants, we don't use the word perfect. But it is different from the Buddha with regard to the Buddha. So, but still this concept of perfect means without any kind of moral weakness. Okay? So now that type of concept we are not using because anyone can have not really lobha dosa moha related moral weaknesses, but the certain things that other people don't like. So we don't want to use this concept of perfect because the perfect person is perfect in every sense. We don't talk about the ordinary people, even about arahant as perfect in that sense. Okay. Now that also you can think about it because when we use particularly the English language, those concepts, we are using the concept of perfect. But in what sense we are using this concept? Now for God they use the concept of perfection because God is perfect in every sense. But then what about human beings? In Buddhism, we can say that we try to attain nirvana by realizing arahanthood. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that is being perfect because it has not been viewed from that point of view. So these are things you need to think in relation to this type of argument. So, okay. Do you have any questions or anything? Do you see the argument or do you have any questions about it? Okay, anyway, think about it. So this is what is called the moral argument, and then we'll move to the next one. Argument from religious experience. Many religious people claim that they experience God in their religious contemplations. It is said that one can experience only that which exists. Since people experience God, God must exist. Since God exists, people experience Him. Religious experience is direct evidence of the existence of God for those who have that experience. For others, it provides indirect evidence. Now, this is something very interesting. A religious person in his or her contemplation, meditation, can come and say that I experience God. Now, important thing is if someone says that I experience God or I saw God in my meditation, now what can we say about it? What can we say about it? Now, if somebody says, I dream God or something, or I had a particular dream, we can't say no. Because if somebody says that that person had a dream, we can't say anything about it because it is his dream or her dream. It happens in her mind. This argument from religious experience is in a way very powerful because it talks about your personal experience. Now, when someone says that in my experience, in my meditation, I experience God, you can't say that, no, you did not. Because it is someone's personal experience, okay? So, it is something very personal to you. It is not shared by anybody else. So, someone can say that, well, I experience God. Now, the argument is that it is said that one can experience only that which exists. Now, if you experience God, it is a proof that God exists, because how can you experience God if God doesn't exist? Now, if we accept this basic idea, you cannot experience something that does not exist, or you cannot something you cannot experience cannot exist, something like that. Now, the idea is that what you experience is what exists. One can experience only that which exists. So, this idea one can experience. One can experience only something that exists. Now, if this is true, one can experience only something that exists. From that we can go to, if one experiences something that thing exists. If we are okay with number 1 here, this one we call this is true. 2. If we accept 1, one can experience only something that exists. From number 1, we can come to number 2. If one experiences something, then that thing exists, right? One can experience only something that exists. What do you think about that? Now, if you see this, that means you experience it. It's a sensory experience. Now, if you see this, okay, then we can say that yes, pen exists, pen is there, that is why you see it. Okay, pen is there, that is why so. So, if you see it, that means it exists. And then, if it exists, then you can see that. It can go either way. You can experience only something if that exists. If you can see it, you can say that you are experiencing it. And then you experience it because it is there. Now, based on this argument, they say that God exists because you experience God. If God doesn't exist, you cannot experience. Now, what do you think about this? When we say God exists, actually our experience is not like experience a pen or like this desk or anything. These are material objects. These things we can experience. I can touch, I can see, and so on. But when we say I experience God, it's something that happens in your mind. Now, when I say this, of course, this experience shared by everybody. All of you can say that, yes, you see pen. But can we say the same thing about the concept of God? If I experience God in my dream or in my meditation, does that mean that all the others experience God in the same manner? No, it is only my personal experience. It is only my experience. Based on my experience, I can say that I experience God. but that experience is not shared by others. It is not common to everybody. Okay? But on the other hand, even for me to experience, it has to exist. What do you think about that? Can't we experience anything that does not exist? If we experience something, is it only because it exists? Can you dream something that you have not seen, even a picture? Sometimes you can?
Yes.
How?
For example, we never see the goat, but sometimes we dream. Emma,
You have not seen what?
the goat.
God. Okay. Now let me put the question this way. Can you dream Taj Mahal if you have not seen it?
We have not seen.
Can you dream, can you see in your dream a Taj Mahal if you have not seen it?
No.
Cannot. But you may dream Taj Mahal because you have seen the pictures. Right? But you have seen the pictures of Taj Mahal. So, what you saw in the picture, you can dream. So that means even if I didn't see it really, even if I see a picture, yeah, I have some image, then I can think about it. But you know, it is something like that. When somebody says you experience God, suppose there are pictures of God, then you have some idea about something related to that picture, you can dream. Or in your meditation or something, it can appear to you. But you know, does that mean that that object really exists? That's the thing. You know, do you really think that this argument is, you know, one can experience something only if that exists? You know, existence has many different degrees. Now, I can dream or see Taj Mahal in my dream, in my sleep, even though I have not gone to India. I have not really gone to Taj Mahal. But I can dream it because I have seen some pictures. But what about something that doesn't really exist? Can't I dream a person with more than 2 hands? I can. Because we have seen people with 2 hands. If we can see people with 2 hands, we can imagine a person with 4 hands, 8 hands, 16 hands. But does that mean that such a person exists? I can dream a person with 16 hands. But do you think that such person really exists in the world like a pen existing? No. So that means actually your experience in something, in your religious experience is not dreaming. But I just took the example of dreaming in order to explain it to you. But religious experience is, you know, something like you are meditating. In a Christian religion, maybe you are saying prayers with lot of devotion. So at that point, you can see that, okay, God appears to you. Okay. So you say that, yes, I saw God. But then, of course, it is, on the one hand, it is your personal experience. Nobody else can share it. Other people cannot say that, okay, I also saw. No, unless they themselves saw that. So, you know, here something interesting is this. Here, when somebody says that I experience God, there are 2 things in that. One thing is, you know, that person has experienced something. Because it is that person's very personal thing, we can't say no. But then the question is whether that what was experienced is really God. You can't say that, we can't say that that person did not have experience. Because experience is a personal thing, we can't deny that. But the thing is, whether that person, when he says or when she says that he experienced God, can it be really true? Now, here you have to make a distinction between 2 things. One thing is, at one level, we can say experience. The other level is our interpretation of E4 experience. Now, experience and our interpretation of experience. There are two stages. When I say something, I saw something in my dream. Then I say what I saw. Actually, when I say what I saw, that's my interpretation. That's my interpretation. Now, suppose you dream something, and then you say, I saw, in my dream, I saw a person. And then you say, in my dream, I saw such and such person. You identify it with somebody. Now, the second stage is actually interpretation. So, you have experience, you have interpretation. Now, in order to understand, we don't need to go very deep. Even look at something simple. Okay, you see this, and then you see a pen. But now everybody knows that, okay, you have some experience, you see something. Now, all of you interpret this as a pen. But then a person who has not seen a pen like this for the whole life, that person will say this is something else. They don't know even this to be a pen, right? You say it is a pen because all of you know about the pen. You see, so it is one thing to see this. It is another thing to give a name to it. We say, I see a pen. Now that is interpretation. Going further, you say you see a pen. Somebody says, I see a beautiful pen. Now when you say this is beautiful, it is interpretation. It is your interpretation. So giving a name is also interpretation. Now, I am drawing your attention to the distinction between having an experience and also describing or interpreting that experience. Now, I am trying to connect this to when somebody says in my meditation or in my prayer, I saw God. Actually, you must be able to distinguish between these two. Having an experience and interpreting that experience. When you are in your prayer or when you are in your meditation, maybe you experience something. But then you interpret it to be experience of God. Now that is an interpretation. So the stage which we cannot say no is experience. If you say I dream about something, how can I say that no, you did not? I can't say that. Or if you say that in my meditation I saw something, nobody can say no. But then the issue is whether what you saw is God or not. You say it is God. For somebody else it is something else. In other words, same experience can be given different interpretations by different people, isn't it? I will give you an example from Sri Lanka. We have this very tall mountain called Sripada, where Buddhists believe that Buddha's footprint is there. So a lot of pilgrims every year, thousands of people go climb that mountain in order to pay respect to the Buddha's footprint. Now that mountain is also well known because in the early morning, when you climb that mountain, behind the mountain you can see early morning sun is rising. So it is a very beautiful scene. Actually, I have not seen that because you have to go really start climbing in the midnight and then go there like 5 o'clock. Then you see early morning sun is rising just behind that mountain because it's so tall. Now, this place, Buddhists think that the Buddha's footprint is there. But also Christian people also go there. They call it Adam's Peak. So they connect it to Adam. Adam and Eve, this at the very beginning of human race, God created Adam. So they connected it to Adam. So, and also Islamic people also go there. Now, all Buddhist, Christians and Islam people in the early morning see this sun rising. It's so beautiful scene. Now Buddhists think that sun god is worshipping the Buddha. Christians think that it is the God's creation and the glory. Muslim people think that it is something again related to God. Now you see, all three people saw the same thing. They saw same thing. But for three people, for the Buddhist it is one thing. For the Christian it is another thing. For the Muslim it is another thing. Now do you see the difference between experience and interpretation of experience? Because you experience something and then you give a name to it. Either you say beautiful or ugly. Now that is interpretation. Actually what you think beautiful is for somebody can be ugly. What is ugly to you for somebody can be beautiful. So our interpretation is different, but what we experience is the same. So there is always a distinction between experience and interpretation. Now in this argument also you will see argument from religious experience. A person has experience, okay? And then to that experience the person gives an interpretation. In other words, in a religious meditation, a person can have some kind of experience, something that person sees. Then that person interprets it to be God. So the second part is the interpretation. Now if I don't believe in God, if I see something in my meditation or whatever, I will not interpret it to be God because I don't believe in God. So the person who believes in God, it can be God, okay? So now experience from religious, argument from religious experience is something very interesting because those people who believe it, they say one can experience only something that exists. But this, you have to really, when you read this, when you look at this, you must be able to really think, is that true? One can experience only something that exists. Now in what sense it is true? And then from that we go, if one experiences something, that thing exists. Is it true? Now when you do this kind of studies, it needs for you to think, okay? Now look at number 2. If one experiences something that exists. Now I said earlier, I can see in a dream a man with 12 hands. So in my experience, I see a man with 12 hands. But does that mean that such a man exists in the world? No. I can just imagine. So whatever I imagine, I can be seeing in a dream. Okay. Now the same thing, suppose somebody can say, I saw the Buddha in my meditation. If somebody says that, what can we say about it? Now Buddha attained parinirvana. Buddha is no more. Okay? Now how do you see the Buddha? Sometimes people say that. If you look at carefully, you can see that what they think to be Buddha is something very close to what they see the picture of the Buddha, image of the Buddha. Now image of the Buddha, actually the first image of the Buddha is something like several hundred years after the parinirvana of the Buddha. So nobody has seen the Buddha, okay? But we imagine Buddha to be like this. So in Myanmar, all the Buddha statues are somewhat like Myanmar faces, So Buddha is like from Myanmar. But if you go to Sri Lanka, face of the Buddha is not like Myanmar Buddha. It's like Sri Lanka Buddha. So what is the Buddha's real face? Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Thailand, or what? If African people make Buddha, it look very dark, isn't it? So who is the real Buddha? So if you say that you saw Buddha in the dream, if you are an African person, you will see a very black Buddha. Or if you are Indian, you will see an Indian Buddha. How can you? So you see, in other words, there is no guarantee. Look at the number 2. hardly you can see that. I can't also see that. You should have told me that you can see it. But anyhow, if one experiences something, that thing exists. You can argue against it. You can say, no, it is wrong. Simply because you experience, simply because you dream, you can't say that it exists. What I am trying to do here is this. When I give you these things, you must be able to think on your own, okay? Whether it is true. So whether you can come up with some kind of counter argument, you can say, no, 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 it can't happen because of this, something like that. So you need to get that, training, that is one way to critically look at this argument. So the argument from religious experience is really, some people say that in their religious meditation or prayer, they see God. So because then you have these things. If you experience it, because it's only something that exists. But if you can challenge these things, you can really reject this argument from religious experience. What we cannot deny, what we cannot say no is that a particular person has experience. But whether that experience is God's experience, we can't say. That's the interpretation. Because you believe in God, you say it is God. Suppose something like that, you are in the meditation, you see a huge light. So that person says, I see God. But does that mean that you really see God? But then the argument is very interesting. Then they say that first you see you had experience, you interpreted it to be God, and then from that you say God exists. Okay? Now this is really the way the argument goes. Okay, this is the second form of argument. Let me go to the one and final argument from rationality. Now this argument is presented by this 16th century philosopher called Pascal. Pascal's is called wager. Pascal's wager. Wager is really gambling. When you gamble, you bet for something. Wager is that, right? Have you gambled? No. Okay. Right. In gambling, we say that, with a card pack, when the people do gambling, you ask for some particular one, then you say that, and then others say no, and then you shuffle it and this thing. So something like that. So the wager is gambling. Now this, actually gambling is based on some kind of rational theory. I will explain it to you what rational means. But basically, rationality, rational being means you do something to your own advantage. You do something to your own advantage, not to your disadvantage. Any rational person will not do something self-harmful. That is one idea. But that again we can critically look at according to Buddhism, but we will leave that for the moment. So on the basis of the belief that any rational person promotes one's own interest, Pascal says that it is rational for one to wager on the existence of God rather than on his non-existence. Okay, now this is a very interesting argument. They say that in gambling situations, you assess all odds and then you gamble, okay, and then you gamble for something in order to win, not to lose, okay. So any rational person will gamble in a manner that will make you winning position, not in a losing position. Now here, Pascal says that any rational person will, who is promoting one's own interest, say that rational for one to wager on, bet on the existence of God rather than non-existence. If you wager on the existence of God, you will have to make some effort to be religious in this life, which is inconvenient. But if God exists, you will be eternally rewarded. If God doesn't exist, you have only lost a very little or nothing. You wager on the non-existence of God and live in a merry life. But if God exists, you will be damned eternally hell. You have gained only a little but lost much. If you wager on the non-existence of God and God does not exist, then you have lost nothing, but the risk is too much. Actually, this is a very interesting argument. Let me show you how it works. Okay, now if we consider two things, one possibility is God exists, okay. The other possibility is God does not exist. Now these are the two possibilities, okay. God exists. Oh, these pens are not very helpful. Okay, God exists, God doesn't exist. We have something like this, okay. And then, so these are the two possibilities. Either God exists or God doesn't exist. We don't know, okay. Either God exists in the world or God does not exist. But you don't know. But what should you really wager on? On what position should you? Okay, now two possibilities are there. So one possibility is you wager on God exists. The other possibility is you wager on God does not exist. So these are the two positions. God exists or God doesn't exist. Now what happens is you wager, okay, you don't know whether God exists or God doesn't exist. You wager on God exists. Then what happens is you don't know. These are the only two positions. Okay, you wager God exists. Okay, God exists, right? If God exists, I'm sorry, what is related to here, I will, there are two possibilities. You are religious in this life, and then you receive eternal heaven next life. Okay, this is what can happen. Either God exists or doesn't exist, odds are 50-50. Either God can exist, but you, according to Pascal, you wager on God exists. Then what happens is, so you wager on God exists, you are religious in this life. But that means that in order to be religious, say Christian sense, you have to go to church on Sunday and you have to do good things and you have to spend money for good things. So little bit inconvenient in this life. Rather than Sunday morning, rather than sleeping little bit late, you have to get up in the early morning and go to church. Okay, so little inconvenience. However, you go to heaven after your death, but you go to eternal heaven. Okay, you go to eternal heaven. So in other words, if God exists, you bet on that God exists, then you are little bit uncomfortable in this life, but you will be so comfortable forever. Okay. Now the situation is, the second is, you wager in God does not exist. But then what happens is God exists. Then if God exists, but you wager on God doesn't exist, then what happens is actually, so you have pleasures in this life, you go to eternal hell. Next time. Now what happens is, okay, you wager that God doesn't exist. But God exists. Then what happens is, okay, because you don't believe in God exists, you don't do religious things and you don't go to church and so you have some fun in this life. But after that, you will be born eternally in hell. Look, so you have some fun in this life, but you lose whole lot of things. You have some discomfort in this life, but you get eternal heaven. So simply this. Now on the other hand, okay, God doesn't exist. Suppose we think that there is no person called God. Then you wager on God exists. You think God exists and you do something. But then what happens is you are uncomfortable. You are not very. Because you follow the religion. Although you believe God doesn't exist, you follow the religion. So you lose something in this life. Okay? Because you have to be going to the church and things like that. So we can say some discomfort in this life. And because there is no God, although you believe that, okay, you can say nothing happens in next life. Alright. Now the other person, you wager on God doesn't exist. Actually God doesn't exist. So you wager God doesn't exist and also God doesn't exist, then it doesn't make you are having pleasure in this life and nothing happens in the afterlife. Okay, so you can say simply pleasure in this life. Nothing happens in the next life. But in these both cases, the risk is too much. The risk is too much because you believe that God doesn't exist. But if God exists, then you will go to eternal hell. Okay, so the risk is too much. Now this is the situation. So this is a wager. Wager means it's a gambling. In this gamble, 50-50. 50% for God exists, 50% for God doesn't exist. You don't know whether God exists or not. Now Pascal's argument is this: if you are a rational person, if you are an intelligent person, you must always wager on the existence of God. That's what he says. Now when you wager on the existence of God, of course you will have to be little discomfort in this life, but you will get eternal heaven. Eternal. So you just have discomfort only very short period, but you will get eternal life. But if you not wager on the existence of God, but God exists, you will have some fun in this life, but after death you will be in hell forever. So he asked, as a rational, intelligent person, what should you do? He says that you must always bet on the existence of God. The principle behind here is this. I think I indicated this to you one of my last lectures. Like you buy a lottery, right? People buy lottery. So lottery is something like, how many chats lottery here? 100? Nobody knows? Okay, in Sri Lanka 20 rupees, like 200 chats. Okay. Now you buy a lottery for say 200 chats. And what are your winning chances? In this country there can be 50 million people. So your winning chances are very, very slim, right? Now, why do you throw away that 200 chats? Why? Because if you don't win, only 200 chats gone, so no big deal. But if you win, you will get so much, right? So that's why you buy lottery. I mean, very often you know that you are not going to win. But who cares about 200 chats? You just buy from 200 chats lottery, and then you don't care whether you win or lose. But if you win, you will be winning unimaginably huge amount of money. If you lose only little bit. Same argument here. If you bet that God exists, you will have to go to church and do good things only in this life, but you will be rewarded eternally. But on the other hand, if you bet that God doesn't exist, but God exists, then you will go to eternally hell. So, Pascal argues that any rational person will wager on the existence of God. Can you see that point? I'm sorry, many people maybe cannot read it from here, but anyway, my eyesight is not very good, maybe you can read it. Now, do you see the point? God exists, God doesn't exist. These are the two possibilities. And then you wager on the God exists, this is what happens. You wager on the God doesn't exist, this is what happens. So either eternal heaven or eternal hell. Is that clear? This is an interesting argument. What do you think about it? According to Pascal, if this is true, then you must wager on the existence of God. Now I will give you a similar situation. Before going into that, I will give you a stanza from Dhammapada. In Dhammapada we have the following stanza. Matta sukha parichaga passe che vipulan sukhang. Chaje matta sukhang dhiro sampassang vipulan sukhang. Anybody knows it? Say it if anybody knows it. Matta sukha parichaga passe che vipulang sukhang chaje matta sukhang dhiro sampassang do you know this? Can everybody say this? Say it. Can you see it? Sampassang vipulan sukhang. This comes in the Dhammapada. If you have learned Dhammapada by heart, you should know this. Matta sukha parichaga passe che vipulang sukhang chaje matta sukhang dhiro sampassang vipulang sukhang. Matta sukha parichaga. Matta means small. If you can see, by sacrificing small happiness, matta sukha parichaga, you sacrifice small happiness, passe che vipulang sukhang. Vipulang means big. You sacrifice small happiness in order to get big happiness. Passe che chaje matta sukhang dhiro. If you are an intelligent person, dhiro, matta sukhang chaje, you give up the small happiness. Sampassang vipulang sukhang, in order to get the big happiness. Now you know this very similar argument. You give up small happiness in order to get the big happiness. Isn't it the same thing we do when you buy a lottery? You give up 200 chats. Who cares? Because you will get, if you win 2 million, even more than that. So thinking about 2 million, you just give up 200, okay? Isn't it? It's the same argument. Matta sukha parichaga. Buddha doesn't say to gamble, but the thing is, it is intelligent thing. You lose, you give up something small if you can get something very big from that. You don't care about the small thing. You just give up the small thing in order to get the big thing. So you know this idea. Now the Pascal's argument is very interesting. Pascal says, in a situation where you don't know whether God exists or God doesn't exist, what should you believe? So according to Pascal, you should believe that God exists. Because if God exists, you will go to eternal heaven. If God exists but you don't believe in God, then you are in trouble. Okay? Now actually this is about something, something we don't see, something we don't know. Something we don't see, something we don't know. Now in that type of situation, what should we do? You know, there is a very similar argument in a discourse of the Buddha. Anybody can tell me what that discourse is? Very similar to this. Very similar to Pascal's argument. There is an argument given by the Buddha. Anybody knows? Anybody remembers? In a discourse, okay, I will erase this. Buddha has taught a very similar argument in one of the discourses. Do you remember that? Okay, the issue is whether Paraloka exists or Paraloka doesn't exist. This comes in the Majjhima Nikaya Apannaka Sutta. I told you in the morning to read Baddali Sutta. Now I say to you to go and read today Apannaka Sutta. Okay? Apannaka Sutta. This comes in the Apannaka Sutta. Majjhima Nikaya. Apannaka Sutta. Now, Buddha addresses this group of people who doesn't believe in Paraloka. Paraloka means life after death. Okay? So the two questions are Paraloka exists, life after death exists, life after death doesn't exist. Now, Buddha says to these people, because these people don't know, they don't believe, like God, they don't know whether Paraloka exists or Paraloka doesn't exist. Then Buddha says to them, that's okay. Buddha says, whether paraloka exists or not, whether paraloka exists or not, you do good things. Whether paraloka exists or not, you do good things. Now, then what happens is, okay, you believe in paraloka, you don't believe in paraloka. But Buddha says that whether you believe it or not, you do good things, okay. Now paraloka exists, and then what happens is, if paraloka is, if paraloka exists, you behave in a certain way. If paraloka doesn't exist, you believe in a certain way. But what happens is, paraloka exists and you believe it, you behave well in this life. You go to heaven in the next life, okay. So you behave well in this life, you go to heaven in the next life. But here we have somebody doesn't believe this. So behave badly in this life, okay. Go to hell in the next life, okay. Now these are the possibilities, and then paraloka doesn't exist. You believe paraloka exists, but paraloka doesn't exist. Then what happens is, because you behave well, people praise you, and then you have relief of mind. Because you behave badly, people blame you. You do not have relief in mind. Now this argument is something very similar to what we discussed earlier. Buddha says this, these people say that they don't believe in paraloka, whether you are born after death or not. Buddha says that's fine. Whether paraloka exists or not, Buddha says to them, do well, do good things. Now when you do good things, if paraloka exists, suppose paraloka exists, because you do good things, two things can happen. In this life, people praise you because you do good things. In the next life, you go to heaven. Okay? Now if paraloka doesn't exist, still then, because you are doing good things, people will say you are a good person. Even if paraloka is not existed. Then in your own mind, you will be having relief, thinking that if paraloka is there, I am okay, because I am doing good in this life. So you do good things in this life, as a result, if paraloka is there, you go to heaven. You do good things in this life, if paraloka is not there, still people will say you are a good person. And then suppose you don't believe in paraloka, you do bad things. Then what happens is, if paraloka exists, then you will go to hell. And then if paraloka doesn't exist, still people will say he is a bad person, his behavior is bad. So in other words, even more than Pascal's argument, here you can see whether Paraloka exists, whether Paraloka doesn't exist, why Buddha asked people to do good? Because if you do good, whether it exists or not, if Paraloka is there, you are okay. Even if Paraloka is not there, still you are okay. And then if Paraloka is not there, but you don't behave well, then of course you are not okay even in this life, and you are not okay even in the next life. So even more than Pascal's argument, according to Buddha's argument, if you behave well, you will win both worlds. If you behave bad, you will lose both worlds, here and after death. Isn't it similar? Isn't it something very similar thing? Now, of course, Pascal's argument is about the concept of God. Now, here we have argument something different, but like God, we don't know about next life. Actually, honestly, none of us have experience about the next life, right? We believe it because, it is rational to believe, it is in the books and, the way we have been brought up to believe it, but we don't know. Honestly speaking, we don't know. Now here, when Buddha meets these people who says to the Buddha that they don't believe in the Paraloka, Buddha never tried to show that, no, Paraloka exists. Buddha never wanted to do that. Buddha said, fine. But even whether you believe or not, just do good things. And then Buddha shows that if you do good things, then you are winning the both worlds. You win this world and you will win next world. Okay? Now, I want you to read actually Apannaka Sutta very carefully. And also now you can know a little bit about Pascal's wager. If you want to really do a compare the two, about Pascal's wager you can find in some account in Google. You can Google as Pascal's wager, you will see some literature. Try to see, these two things, how these two arguments go. Now, anyway, when we look at Pascal's wager, Pascal's argument on the existence of God, now his argument is based on the idea that good and bad always depends on the believing in or not believing in God. Now that is quite common for Christian or theistic religion. But as in Buddhism, we know that good and bad doesn't necessarily depend on God, right? In Buddhism, there is no God, but still good and bad is there, right?
Yes.
So, in order to believe in good and bad, in order to behave good and bad, you don't have to believe in God or not believing in God. It is not necessary. But Pascal's argument is based on the idea that good and bad is based on the concept of God. So, in that context, you can say that Pascal's argument is a rational argument. But on the other hand, we know that in order to be good, you don't have to have God. If you are bad, of course, even though there is no God to punish you, you will be born in the hell. So, according to Buddhism, we can say that no need God in order for someone to be good or bad. But when you see the Pascal's argument, you have to see that Pascal presents this argument. He thinks that religion is good and bad is impossible without God. He thinks that if there is no God, you can do anything. Because no hell. But we don't believe that. Even though there is no God, you can't do anything you like. You have to behave morally. Do you see the basic difference between Buddhism and theistic religion? In Buddhist tradition, in order to be good, we don't have to have a belief in God. But in many situations in the theistic religions, people believe there must be God in order to be good. If there is no God in the world, you can do anything. But of course, it is not like that. The morality must be meaningful whether God exists or not. Okay? It is dangerous actually, because if morality depends on God, all those people who don't believe in God will not be moral. That's not a very good thing. But of course, religions like Buddhism, even Jainism, Advaita Vedanta, these religions show that, in order for someone to be moral, you don't have to be believing in God. Okay, now this is the last argument I wanted to discuss with you on the existence of God. So this argument was presented by this philosopher called Blaise Pascal. So the Pascal's argument is what is called Pascal wager. So it comes from this the action of gambling. So in the gambling, the theory is like lottery. You give up a small thing, in order to get a big thing. That's a kind of rationality here. So what he says is, if God exists, to be religious is little bit troublesome, right? Have to get up in the early morning and all these things, trouble. But of course you undergo that trouble only on this life. Next life and onward you will be eternally heaven. So you lose little, gain much. That's the concept. You lose little and gain much. So as a rational person, Pascal says that you must wager on the existence of God. Okay folks, during these last 3 sessions, including today, I have been discussing with you the arguments given by those people who believe in God in order to prove that God really exists. At the very beginning of this discussion, I told you why this belief is so important. Because in a theistic religion, existence of God is crucial. Because for those religions, if God doesn't exist, then everything loses the meaning. So you really have to prove the existence of God. Now I presented to you various different types of arguments on the existence of God, and also I tried to develop some kind of Buddhist critique, how to look at these arguments from the Buddhist point of view. So lastly today we had Pascal's wager based on the gambling theory. You gamble on something where you get more by putting down little. So that was the idea. And also I gave you this Dhammapada stanza, Matta Sukha Parichaga, Pachese Vipulan Sukang, Chaje Matta Sukang Diro, Sampasang Vipulan Sukang. Of course, Buddha doesn't talk about gambling, but even our day-to-day life, you sacrifice little things in order to get much larger things. So that is being rational. Okay, so I will wind up my discussion from that. Do you have any questions or comments or anything you don't understand or anything you don't agree with me? Not with me, but okay, I can see that you need some time to digest these things. Okay, you go and reflect more. Actually, these my PowerPoint presentations. If anybody wants, you can talk to Venerable Dhammachara. You can make use of them. There is no problem. But I want you to pursue. Like in the morning, I asked you to read this Majjhima Nikaya Sutta Baddali. The same manner, you read Apannaka Sutta and also see how this argument has been presented by the Buddha. Okay, I will wind up the discussion from this today. Next 24th, we will have a special day, and 25th also, because I lost one day, and so I will be having extra class on next 24th. So we will have classes on 24th and also 25th. Okay, thank you very much.